Today we are going to discuss about the economic environment that is faced by companies trying to get into international business. Now, we have discussed about culture, political and legal environments, right? So this is the last one in environments, that's economic environment. Now, firms, when they think of entering other markets, now they think about culture, political and legal environments, but those are not as important for them as economic environment. Because if the economic environment of a country is not good, conductive for their business, then they are not going to enter that. Doesn't matter if there are no cultural differences or political and legal environments are very good, totally fine. They are not going to enter that market unless it makes economic sense. So they have to think about which countries to go to or in which order to enter these countries depending on their economic environment. Okay? I have to go and change the slide every time, so exercise for me. Okay, now managers assess countries' environment, different countries' environment, knowing that these countries are different in different ways. Now all countries are not same in the same way. Now some country may have a certain kind of economic threat, another country may have another kind of economic threat. So you have to understand that all countries cannot be judged using the same kind of scales. Now, economic and political changes alter market circumstances, meaning that the change in government policies with change in governments will alter how a market is working. Now, you see, under Trump, what are we seeing? Trade war, right? So that's a kind of, you can say, market circumstance that we have right now. And that might trigger trade wars in other parts of the world as well. Now, it's important to understand connection chains and consequences. Now, there are connections between events. Now, anything political happening, anything happening in terms of like war, all that will have an effect and consequence on the economic well-being or economic situation in the world. Now, then there are the challenges of the comeback. Now, comeback of whom? Comeback of India and China. Now, challenges for Western countries, not for us. Why? Because they have to deal with the growing rise of two of the biggest economies of the world, that is India and China. Now, why do we call it a comeback? It's called a comeback because earlier, before the Industrial Revolution, now when did the Industrial Revolution start?
1776.
Exactly, year. Okay, where did it start?
England, British.
England. So, before that, most of the world economy was under control of India and China. But the Industrial Revolution came and things changed a lot. So, that order, that change in world order, that change in the control of power is shifting slowly towards India and China. And that is a challenge for most established powers, economic or otherwise. And they have to deal with this kind of problem because the consumers, the producers, everybody is in these two countries. So that's one thing that we have to worry about. I mean, not we, even the established powers have to worry about. Then there's choices of citizens, policymakers, and institutions. Now, what kind of decision we make as consumers, or as government make, or as policymakers make, will have an effect on how business is conducted, and that's why managers need to worry about these things. Okay? Next slide. Okay. A universal assessment of economic environment is difficult. You can't use the same method of assessing the economic health of different countries. Why? Because there is system complexity. Identifying proper indicators is difficult. Now you cannot use the same indicators in all markets. Okay. Even if you try, it's difficult. Why? Because let's say, how do we measure inflation? Have you heard of something called CPI? Yes, Consumer Price Index. Now, inflation in retail is measured using Consumer Price Index. That is, you take a few products and then you see how their prices have changed and you calculate Consumer Price Index. But that's not universal. One, the method is not the same in every country. Second, the products that each country takes is also different. In that case, how are you going to compare between two countries, which one has a better CPI? It's not possible. Then, another thing like GDP. Now, how do you calculate GDP? I'm not asking the exact formula or something. Generally, how do you calculate GDP?
Expenditure or income of all the country, all the country.
Now, the problem is that let's say all the money that is earned within a country for a given year, that's your GDP, okay? Or the total productions that takes place, it should be the same. But the problem is that some countries may include some industries and others may not, okay? Let's say that you may include your movie industry in your GDP, or you may not include it. It's not up to like somebody else. The government decides what to include in GDP and what not to include in GDP calculations. So what you're going to get is a different calculation. If I do it, I may get a different number. If the government does it, you get a different number because they're including something else. Okay? And the government can use that to show that we are doing better, just by fudging some numbers or changing the industries that they're including in GDP. So in this way, it's difficult to actually compare economies because of these systems that they have and different indicators are used. Then market dynamism. Markets keep changing. They are not constant. Most markets are volatile. And markets change at the smallest cue. Okay? If Trump announces a new policy that only is related to America, still that's going to affect markets all around the world. The government makes a small decision of like not printing more notes, that affects share markets. Have you seen? I mean, do you read the news? The market fell, the market is, it's bullish or bearish. These are two economic terms used, right? Bull means the market is going up, bear means the market is going down. So, if small things, small government policy changes can affect or the stability of a government, its relationship with its neighbors, situations of war, all these affect the markets. The markets are very dynamic, so it gets difficult to really assess what's going on. Then there's the issue of market interdependence. Understanding how truly a country's economy is doing gets complicated because most countries do not trade without trading with other countries. There is so much interdependence that you don't know what's going on. Now, some countries depend on foreign trade so much that if you remove it, their economy is very small. If you add it, the economy becomes big. So it gets difficult to actually understand how well individually or in isolation an economy is doing. Then we have data overload. That is, you have so much data available in certain circumstances that it gets difficult to make a decision. There's too much to see and you are not able to see the big picture because of the amount of data that is there. Any questions so far? No? Okay. Now, we discussed about political freedom. Now there is economic freedom. Where economic freedom is a situation where people have the right to work, produce, consume, save and invest in the way they prefer. So you measure it across business freedom, monetary freedom, fiscal freedom, investment freedom, freedom from corruption, property rights, trade freedom, government size, etc., etc. You can read it. Now, economic freedom is again not the same around the world. Let's see. Economic freedom by region with population. Clear?
Yeah.
Let's have a look. Now, the size, this is equal to 500 million, roughly, the size of the circle. Now, if you see, this is 768 million sub-Saharan Africa, okay? Economic freedom is very low. If it goes higher, this is higher economic freedom. Then you have Asia Pacific, 3.7 billion. And we slowly move on and you see that North America has the highest economic freedom and population is slightly less than 500 million. And Europe has economic freedom as well. So you can get an idea where we are. Okay? Now you might think that, in Asia Pacific, there are many countries, right? All these countries here, you can do your business freely, then why don't we have economic freedom? Why is this at a lower end of the economic freedom spectrum? Do you think markets here are free? Why do we have, I used to think that our markets are free. But not now, many years ago. But what kind of freedom we do not have? And why Europe is lower than North America?
Because of the European Union that restricts in a way.
So because of European Union,
Comparing Europe and North America. But Asia Pacific, I'm not sure. Maybe because of the political restrictions in China.
So there are two things. First, in Europe, you have restrictions on business that you do not have in North America. Like restriction related to competition. Now in European Union, they try to reduce any situation where competition is not there. Okay? They're trying to make it competitive. That's government restriction in the sense that if you have a monopoly, you may even get fined. If you're doing too good in the market, you become too powerful, you may get fined. That happens. EU has fined Intel for being too big in the market. So then in Germany, you have restrictions related to store timing, when you can open and when you can close your store. There are restrictions related to when you can give discounts. Now, these restrictions are there to protect people's rights and improve quality of life. And most other countries don't seem to care about that except in Europe. So that's why in North America you don't have those kind of restrictions. That's why Europe is lower. Now, in our case, 3.7 billion. That includes all the countries in this region, India, China, and in South Asia Pacific, this whole area. We have restrictions because what kind of restrictions are there? For example, if you want to go and open some kind of factory in India, there are a lot of restrictions in terms of where you can do your FDI and where you cannot. The government does not allow FDI in many sectors. Same with all the countries here. The government has a lot of control on a lot of industries like railways. In all this region, railway is government owned. Okay? In the US, it's private owned as well. Stations are privately owned in many US states, but we don't have this kind of thing here. Electricity may be privately owned or government owned in this region. Telephone, usually government owned, the landline systems. So government has a control on these sectors. But in European and North American countries, government does not have that much control over production. The government does not try to control prices too much. In this region, as the prices rise, the government starts offering you the same thing for a lower price. So these kind of interferences in the market becomes, let's say, sluggish when the government intervenes. The market becomes strong, the government changes policies. So any kind of government interference, for good or for bad, reduces freedom. Because, you see, markets are supposed to run, the ideal way in capitalism is that you leave the market as it is, you do not interfere with it. Meaning that the markets run on supply and demand. You know supply and demand?
Yeah.
What happens if supply increases? What happens to price if supply increases? It's down. What happens to demand what happens to price when demand increases? And based on situation of supply and demand, we achieve a price equilibrium. Now, this price equilibrium is something that the government may not agree to. Maybe the prices in the market are too high, so the government might interfere, either directly or indirectly, by selling at a lower price, saying good thing because the government tries to, you can say, interfere to protect some of the economy and social classes. So if you see, in your own country, you'll understand what kind of government interference is there, and if that is good or bad, whatever it is, that's a kind of interference, and that's called lack of freedom. If the interference is too extreme, then you are here at the lower end. So that's economic freedom. Then you're free to open your business, you're free to run your business, but you cannot venture in all kinds of business, and then you have to compete with government. So that's how economic freedom works. Now, global distribution of economic freedom, you see here, blue is 80 to 100 free in terms of score. Blue, you can see, it's Australia, New Zealand, this is Switzerland, right? Seems so. That's it. Now, US and Canada are not in free, they were. But after 2008 crisis, the government increased a bit of control, in the sense that you cannot just keep cheating people. So there was a bit of regulation to control banks, to control industries from making too much profit at the cost of consumers. So this is in green, that is 72, 80%, almost free. And dark green, you have Canada, United States here, and Japan, South Korea, and most of Western Europe, it seems. Then in orange you have 60 to almost 70% free. Mongolia, Kazakhstan, Saudi, Turkey, some countries, Spain is there, some countries in Europe, in South America, and in Africa. You know what this is? Madagascar. Have you seen the movies?
Yeah.
I know that because of that. Okay. Now, 50 to 60%, this is this color. So you have most of Asia. India comes under that, even Indonesia. Okay. Now, China and India clubbed together, that's something that I would disagree to, because China has much more control over economic activities than India or Indonesia. But according to this, they are the same. Then you have the violet ones, these are very low, and then red ones are not ranked. Okay? Because possibly because of the conflicts going on in these areas. This is Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Sudan, not ranked. Okay? Any questions here? No? Okay, what's the value of economic freedom? Why do we need economic freedom and what it does? Now, economic freedom leads to a lot of changes in the country. Now, economic freedom affects growth rates. You have more economic freedom, you have higher growth rates. But that's not really true in the sense that the countries that we saw, like India and China, Indonesia even, saw that the growth rate is high and we have lower economic freedom. But yes, economic freedom in these countries have increased, leading to increasing growth. Before 1990s and 80s, there was no economic freedom in these countries. And economic freedom was introduced and the growth rate increased a lot. Productivity is higher, income level is higher. Now if you see the income level in the countries where you have more economic freedom, like US, Canada, South Korea, Japan, New Zealand, Australia, you see that their income levels are very high. Even most European countries, because they have more economic freedom. Then you have inflation. Inflation is not that high.
No.
Okay? Inflation is low to the extent that sometimes the government has to add inflation a bit, because you should always have positive inflation. It should not go to deflation. Then you have higher employments, better life expectancy. That is the number of years that you live. Okay? Now, most countries do not have, now things have improved, but life expectancy was not very high. If you go 100 years back, most people only lived for like 40 to 50 years of age. And then some disease would kill them. After vaccination and antibiotics came, things have changed a lot. But in most Western countries and with higher you can say economic freedom, you have higher life expectancy. Even in Japan, because Japan, South Korea, they have higher incomes, higher economic freedom. Literacy. Okay. Now, what's the literacy rate in your country? Literacy is basically the percentage of people who have access to education or have been educated. Now again, it's difficult to compare because in different countries, how literacy is measured is different. Some countries you have to go to primary school, some countries middle school, some countries you should be able to write your name. That's enough for literacy. Okay? So, what is the literacy rate in your country? Do you know?
Moderate level, because pemerintah have the government.
Just give me a number out of 100. It's in percentage, so.
70 above but below 80%.
You're sure?
Yeah.
Okay. Any other?
I guess around 100.
Around 100? Okay. Any other country? You know? Your own country, do you know the literacy rate? No? Please check. India, I think it's 70 to 75%. Taiwan is close to 100, 98%. Now, most economically free country will have higher than 90.
In Indonesia, 95%.
95%. That's good. 95% is good.
If I can trust Wikipedia, it says 99.6%. Yes.
That should be correct. These numbers are like, you can rely on them in most cases. Okay.
92% in Thailand.
That's good. Anything above 90 is good.
99% in Hong Kong.
You are on top of everything. As I said, it's easiest to do business in Hong Kong and Singapore. very difficult to live. It's too expensive. And people say that Switzerland is very expensive, France is very expensive. No. It's Hong Kong and Singapore. And London. London is very expensive. It's my opinion. But still, Hong Kong and Singapore. Okay, so you have the idea about literacy in your country. Okay. So you can feel good or feel bad, whatever it is. Then the other thing is political openness. Now, if you have more economic freedom, you have possibly more cultural freedom, more legal freedom, more political freedom, and that leads to more political openness. You are not worried about losing power in the sense that whatever people want they can say. Fair and free elections are there. There is a space for dissent. Okay? Now, space for dissent in the sense that, like in the UK, you know, UK is not only England, right?
Yes.
So what is it? England and
Scotland.
okay. Now, they are not very happy with each other, and they want to separate. But in the sense that they want independence, that we want a separate country. So that's the situation in many countries. Some countries you have like more of a negative kind of feeling towards this kind of dissent. In England, they're fine. Okay, we understand you want to separate, but let's talk about it. So there is a openness in the sense that you can talk about it, there is no problem regarding that. So this kind of openness comes with more of the economic freedom and prosperity, where you have space of without getting angry on each other and having a talk and trying to find a solution to the problem. So political openness also is there with economic freedom. Then you have environmental sustainability. Now this is tricky. Environmental sustainability is something that nobody wants to do, except Germany. The Germans are highly interested in that, wanting to do more than required. But other than that, most countries are not very interested. Even Taiwan, I mean, they have a lot of technologies in progress, development. They are spending a lot of money on environmental sustainability, but most countries are not interested because this is a costly affair. Upgrading, if you have to achieve environmental sustainability, reduce pollution, greenhouse gases, that's a very costly affair. You have to invest a lot of money in upgrading your factories, changing regulations, and all that. And countries do not want to do that because that strains their economy. It can slow down their growth. So, they are not really interested. Now, if you talk about sustainability, for example, in the US, it's a very economically free society. Now, there also you have environmental sustainability is not something that people think about. Their energy consumption is much, much higher than most countries in the world. So, in environmental sustainability, ideally, more economic freedom should bring that because people have more money to handle it, but that doesn't happen. Okay? Do you have any other arguments for this? Or
Just-
counter arguments? Yes.
I would like to add that in European Union recently there's been a law adopted that says no more plastic cups and plastic plates are being produced. So the countries have to stop producing these and selling these.
No, I know European Union there is it's very different. Okay. In the sense that you have laws, they're much ahead of time compared to other countries. In the sense that there are laws to protect privacy, laws to protect the environment. They are enforcing those laws and people are accepting them or they are forced to accept them. But most countries are not following them. Okay. They're not interested in doing it. Level of pollution in you can check in many countries. You know what's PM 2.5? PM 2.5. It's just an air quality index particle. You measure the concentration and you can know how much the air is polluted. So PM 2.5, if you check in any cities in India and China, you'll be, shocked to know the number. Now PM 2.5 should be below 50, as we have in Hualien. Okay? In Taiwan also only Hualien has below 50. So you're breathing the freshest air in the world almost. In New Delhi, it's usually 300 to 400. In winters, it increases, sometimes even reaching 1,000. Beijing, same condition. Okay. In Mongolia, same thing happens in winter. So we have this issue which is there, and that causes a lot of problems. People, it's like they say that in Delhi, New Delhi, it's like smoking 40 cigarettes a day, even when you're not smoking. I don't know why I quit. What's the use? But anyway, I'm here, so it doesn't matter. In Taiwan, the air is very clean, comparatively. But the situation is very bad. We open, like during daytime, try to check Shanghai, Beijing, all these air quality, and you will know the situation. But nobody is doing anything about it. So, yes, some countries are doing more, but nobody cares. That's because we are not seeing the consequences. The research says that it's temporarily too distant. We cannot see, so we do not think that it's a problem. So we live our lives like that. Anyway. Any questions here? Or comments? You guys seem to be particularly silent today. What's going on? Usually I am the one who is slow, but I'm okay today. Slept well. Okay. Now, the trend towards increased economic freedom is no longer certain. We don't know if economic freedom will keep increasing because questions about the legitimacy of free markets. Now, free markets like the US, there are questions because of depression. Now, economic boom and depression is part of capitalism. So, if the markets are too free, capitalism is at the strongest, and then you have the market forces are totally dependent on supply and demand. Now what happens then is that companies start taking advantage of the situation and fooling consumers, as it happened in 2008. It was a very complicated thing. The market was, you can say that there was a false economic prosperity in the housing industry that time.